I think we could still give a couple more minutes here. I think some folks might still be joining. We'll get started in just a couple minutes.
Recording in progress.
We're getting to pretty close to a critical mass here of folks. So I'll hand it over to you, Doug, for whenever you'd like to get us started here.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I am Doug Burks, president of MARC and a member of the Religious Society of Friends. I would like to open our meeting with a prayer, and I want to do a reading from my faith tradition, and it is something that we all share. And it's from Proverbs 3, verses 27 to 31. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back tomorrow and I'll give it to you, when you already have it with you. Do not plot harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully near you. Do not accuse anyone for no reason when they have done you no harm. Do not envy the violent or choose any of their ways. May we today center on violence in our communities. May we become open to ways that we can become and build a peaceful and loving community. May we be open to find ways to eliminate the horrific tools of violence, guns, from creating havoc in Cincinnati. We ask you, Divine Spirit, to open us up to the message we will hear today, so that we can be emboldened to take positive action. Amen. As we do, we begin our meeting with the roll call of judicatories and guests. So Holly, if you're ready, let's do the roll call. So judicatories first, American Baptist Church, USA, Miami Association.
Here, Mark Bever.
Okay. The Archdiocese of Cincinnati.
Andrew,
Lee.
Mary, Bob,
Okay. The Cincinnati Islamic Community Center.
Present.
Okay. Diocese of Southern Ohio Episcopal Church.
Present.
Ariel Miller and Karen Montagno.
Okay. Disciples of Christ Southwest Ohio.
Here, Cheryl Coggins.
Okay.
Thomas Barnes.
Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation. Great Miami River District United Methodist Church.
Dwayne Gordon.
Presbyterian.
Jan Seymour.
Okay, I'm sorry, Jan. Presbyterians. Unitarian Universalist Council of Greater Cincinnati.
Bob Lamb.
United Church. Go ahead.
Carol Wommeldorf.
Okay.
Vic and Carol Fensel.
United Church of Christ of Southwest Ohio and Northern Kentucky.
President
Linda
John.
Overholt, Jonathan.
Any guest who will you introduce yourself and your organization or affiliation?
Doug, you forgot yourself. The
Oh,
Friends.
Religious Society of Friends.
Carol Burks.
Nathan Lund.
And Nan Hatch.
hmm
Any guest?
Not sure if I count, but I'm a guest speaker, Councilmember Anna Albi.
Oh, you're a guest. You're a friend. So thank you. Holly, do you have everyone?
Yes, thank
Also, right, okay. You should have, via email or online, have received a copy of our April 9th, 2025 meeting minutes. Are there any corrections that we need to make?
We need to correct the name of our executive director.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We will get that corrected.
Hearing no other corrections, our minutes stand approved. The next is you should have also either online or via email received a draft of our agenda for today. Are there any corrections?
I'm sorry, I think that's where the misspelling or whatever of the executive director I was thinking of.
I think they melded Danny and I together, yes. So if we would correct that, it's Danny Burridge is our executive director. With that correction, our agenda is approved. As I said earlier, I'm Doug Burks, and I'm really glad, the president of Mark, I'm really glad that you're here today. We are going to be centering on a very important issue and topic today. As a member of the Religious Society of Friends, Quaker, that is Quaker, nonviolence and peace are very important to me. I would like to turn it over to Danny for a short executive director's update. So Danny.
Thanks, Doug. And thanks again to everybody for being here, and especially to Councilmember Anna Albi. Really glad to have you here. Very excited to hear from you on your topic that you've chosen regarding the city's approach to reducing gun violence. But just really briefly, just a couple announcements, and very much based on the work that we're doing in committees right now within Mark. First off, from our strategic planning committee, we are at a moment where we are going to be submitting new mission and vision statements to the board of directors for their discussion. So that's a big step for us. Really excited to have a discussion at the level of the board of directors around these updated mission and vision and how we work statements. Also, on housing, our other really primary concern, in addition to community violence prevention, housing, we did have a meeting with Mayor Piraval a couple weeks back. You all remember that we had really been interested in having him, and again, not to, we don't want to create or replicate the hierarchies here, but we were very interested in having Mayor Piraval also for a delegates council. We ended up having just kind of a direct meeting with him, which was really wonderful, really productive. We did not agree on every single point when it comes to affordable housing, but we did agree that it is very important for us to continue talking, to continue having a relationship between Mark and the mayor's office in order to make sure that we can collaborate and support one another on all of the really important initiatives around housing that are happening in the city, and to continue speaking our truth and our values as Mark when it comes to making sure that housing is being provided to the neediest people in our communities. On that note, we are also on the cusp of also submitting some housing principles for discussion at the Mark Board of Directors as well, to also guide our advocacy in that area. Finally, on our other concern of violence prevention, we are also doing a lot of work in our in our Community Violence Prevention Committee. Also moving towards working on some principles to guide our advocacy work around community violence prevention. So more to come, and stay tuned on that. But really, we're very happy and really excited to hear from Council Member Albi on this topic of violence reduction strategies, especially as the committee and all of us here as delegates and guests at Mark. We know that the summer months are historically times when there is more gun violence. And so this is a time for us all to really be engaged and informed on this topic, and to see how we can engage and interact and collaborate with the city, which is also doing a lot on this topic. So I will cede the floor with that. And again, thank you all very much.
And so it is my pleasure to introduce Anna Albi, a member of this City of Cincinnati Council, a longtime Cincinnatian who has been active in the community throughout her life. Her bio is online, and I strongly urge you to take a look at it. Today, Councilperson Albi does want to speak on the city's approach to reducing gun violence. I will remind people that we have a presentation, but we also always have a very good discussion, questions and answers, and input. I ask people that, especially if you're on a laptop to where you have all your things at the bottom, there's one symbol at the bottom that is this beautiful little heart that says react. And if you click on that, it says raise your hand. It is very hard for us to call on people when on my screen, people go over two pages. So, to try to flip back and forth, if you raise your hand, it comes up on that first screen, and it allows us to see you. I'm really anticipating hearing Anna and to update us on what the city is doing and her ideas and impressions of what we can do to deal with this really horrific issue that is gun violence. So I'll turn it over to Anna. Kind of how you want to do things is up to you. If you want to entertain some questions while you're speaking, feel free. But usually we give you time to about 12, 40, 45 or so for presentation. So if you're looking at timing. So Anna.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for having me here today. And I really wanted to start just grounding us in the moment. I realize we had two tragic incidents back to back a couple weeks ago. So I'm not going to address those incidents today, but I realize the community is really feeling the pain, and we have the Hinton family and the Henderson family are both in a lot of pain right now, and there's a lot happening in the community. So my heart goes out to everyone who's feeling that. And so I just wanted to start there and ask, as you're talking with folks in the community, anything you can do to help kind of turn the temperature down would be really helpful as we got to navigate what plays out here. But I want to start by just acknowledging that pain. So with that, I thought what I could do is start a little bit with my typical how I talk about gun violence generally, and walk people through kind of my perspective, and then dive into what the city's plan, which is called Act for Cincy. So first off, I've got you all on gallery mode. So when I usually think of gun violence, or when most people do, we think about gun violence prevention, we start thinking about legislation and laws. Has anyone, and I know we've got a couple experts in the room, Carol, I know you're going to know the answer to all these questions. So apologize if some of this will be repetitive for some of you, but for those of you who can, has anyone here heard of the Ohio preemption law? If you can just raise your hand if you're on camera. Okay, yeah, Carol. All right, so, okay, thanks, Deb. So in the state of Ohio, at the state level, our state legislature has passed a law that prevents local municipalities like the city of Cincinnati or city of Norwood, right, from passing any type of gun legislation. And for those of you who might remember, Cincinnati tried to pass, a ban on bump stocks in the wake of the Las Vegas shooting. We went to court, we lost that. In 2023, city of Cincinnati passed a couple of gun ordinances, one of them including requiring secure firearm storage, locking up your guns, specifically when kids are around. And sadly, last year in 2024, that went to court and we lost. We actually lost twice. So when we think about tackling gun violence in the state of Ohio, I want everyone to walk away understanding, our state house makes this really hard. And they've continued to, not only do they block common sense laws at the local level, they are also passing a series of bad, dangerous laws at the state level. So think about permitless carry. So now people can buy a gun, carry a concealed weapon with no permit, no training, no background check. We have the arming teachers laws. So now with just a matter of hours of training, teachers can carry guns in the room and with no requirement to inform parents if that teacher has a gun in the classroom. There's also, they're known as stand your ground laws. I call them shoot first laws. Ohio has one of those too, which is kind of a legal defense where people can invoke the stand your ground as an excuse for why they shot someone. So we have just a series of dangerous gun laws, and every single time the legislature is in session, there more and more come up. So my background before City Council was leading Moms Demand Action, which I know Karen is familiar with since she's been involved with, but it's a group of volunteers, that does gun legislation advocacy here at the local level. And more often than not, in the state of Ohio, we are having to push back against these terrible bills at the state house. So I wanted to start the conversation there because now we have a federal government that has dismantled the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. They are already defunding gun violence prevention initiatives across the nation. And our state house is preventing us from passing legislation, not funding gun violence prevention programs, and passing all these terrible gun laws. So when you have all of that, it makes it really tough at the local level. So then that leads to kind of what else do we do? Or how else can we tackle gun violence when you don't have legislation as a tool in your tool belt? So oftentimes we think of law enforcement. Law enforcement for me, when I think about from the Cincinnati police perspective, is not just the officers on patrols, but it's the other work we do within Cincinnati police. We have a Crime Gun Intelligence Center. Has anyone heard of CJIC, the Crime Gun Intelligence Center? Okay, okay, I see a couple hands. Okay, great. Okay, good. So for that, this is literally a gold standard in the nation. It's a partnership with the Sheriff's Department, other law enforcement agencies in the ATF, where when you go to a crime scene, or even when ShotSpotter is called and there are gun shell casings, what they're able to do is actually connect those shell casings to the gun that fired it, the crime gun. And what that does is it allows us to say, okay, we had a shooting over here and a shooting over here and a shooting over here. The same gun was involved in all three of those shootings. And then using that, we're able to finally trace it back to who was wielding that firearm. So that is a really unique and sophisticated tool we have in the city of Cincinnati. So sometimes when there are articles around about, ShotSpotter and the impact that's had on police response, this is something that makes it very unique in the city of Cincinnati, because ShotSpotter can also tell us, hey, gunshots happen, so we can go get those shell casings and add it to our inventory as we're tracking these guns across the city. Also work inside the police department that I'm proud of is our Victims Assistance Liaison Unit, led by Karen Rumsey, which is a group of social workers that partner with every survivor of homicide, or if they've been shot, to help them through the process, navigating the court system through their CCRO program, working with being that intermediary with the detectives, but then also having a support group that these survivors can attend and have that support in that community. And I think that survivor support is really, really important, because we talk a lot about gun violence prevention, but there's also a whole lot after an incident has happened when we think about supporting survivors and breaking that cycle of violence. In that same vein, we also have the Divert program, which is a partnership with Women Helping Women. It's another acronym. I'm going to be full of acronyms today. I apologize, but it's Domestic Violence Emergency Response Team, I believe. And that is when there's a domestic violence call, that Women Helping Women team will go out and respond on the scene to offer on the spot support to those survivors. And so again, when we think about how do we think holistically about responding to these incidents? We also have our PIVOT, another acronym. It's a place-based violent offender territory, but it is a policing tactic and a community engagement tactic. But around the policing part, it's the Cincinnati police identify kind of hot spots in the city where we're having repeated shootings, and then launches kind of a place-based investigation to understand what's happening on this block, on this corner, for why there are shootings happening here. So we have two designated spots currently. One is in Northern OTR, another in the West End. And part of that was, for a long time, these pivot community engagement meetings. Coming out of those engagement meetings, Cincinnati finally launched our Achieving Change Together Act for Cincy blueprint, which I will get to, but just want to make a note of that there. And then another piece that I think is really important with how we're thinking innovatively when it comes to, quote, law enforcement is actually our alternative response to crisis team. Has anyone heard of our alternative response to crisis team, ARC? Oh, I see a couple hands. Great. So for those who aren't familiar, that's the group where if a call comes in and it's a non-violent incident, specifically if there's like a mental health issue, Cincinnati will actually deploy a behavioral health specialist and a paramedic to respond to that. And then we've seen really great results. There's actually a whole dashboard you can look up online and how many calls ARC has fielded. So if you think about even in terms of, if there's a situation with like someone who might be unhoused, right? Having the right type of response show up and handle that incident is really important and compassionate, right? It's a good use of resource. It's compassionate. It's providing the right support. With that, we also recently, just this year, increased our alternative response team to also include what are called community responders. And this is a great new team that's up and running, that they kind of wear two hats. So one hat is, hey, if your car breaks down on the side of the road, we don't need to send a patrol officer to file that report. We can send one of these community responders who can have their car, have the lights flashing, make sure you're safe, do the report. The other hat that they can wear too is actually working with community to kind of help conflict manage and turn down the temperature. So one of the places we've been deploying them is at the transit centers. So if you all remember, February last year, there was a series of videos that came out and fights breaking out at like Fountain Square and Government Square with kids coming through for the buses. These community responders are now assigned to that to really be a buffer between the kids and the police, because we recognize it is not an ideal outcome to have, kids arrested over and over here, right? So these community responders get a ton of training, and they're really there to be that cushion, and working side by side with the community advocates who have been doing amazing work with the kids for well over a year now. Okay, so I think I've listed off a lot of the kind of police stuff, but I wanted to make sure when we all think about the work happening within Cincinnati Police and how we can think about violence reduction, it's a lot more than just, cars on patrol, because I think it's important to recognize that. So then that leaves kind of the last bucket, which I usually tackle as kind of the big one around the community, right? Are people being paid enough to afford a roof over their head, fresh food on the table, access to healthcare, and how we as a city can be investing into community-led projects when it comes to keeping, specifically kids safe. So there's a lot in that field. I'm going to zoom in very quickly on a couple of things that I'm personally working on and passionate about around food insecurity. This was something that really came from being in rooms and in conversations with the community. Is I would be in a community conversation about gun violence, and it just felt like inevitably the conversation came back to our kids are hungry, there's no grocery store in our community. And so when I came into office last year, I really felt like, hey, we got to dig in on this food thing. Like adults and kids are hungry. There's some connection here. And we actually, my office connected with a researcher out of Tulane University, which they had used their hospital-based violence intervention program. We have one too, I'll talk about it, where they were tracking for those who are coming in with gunshot wounds, if how their community rated on kind of the food insecurity level. And they found a really strong correlation between, communities with food insecurity and rates of violence. So with that as a kind of that plus the anecdotal piece of it, my office has really been trying to dig in on the food insecurity work to see, hey, how can we stabilize a community by making sure people are fed, right? We know Maslow hierarchy of needs, food and shelter. So a couple things we've done, in the past year and a half here. First, my office led up an effort to allocate $50,000 to support the efforts down at the transit stations to make sure we can buy food for the kids coming through and get them a snack to help them through the day. Because again, what I was hearing from the advocates who are down at Government Square regularly is that the kids are coming in, they're hungry, right? They're hungry, they're hangry, and just helping them get through the end of the day. So we also, in addition, opened up, led the charge on the Impact Award, which is part of our human services funding, but it's an $850,000 grant. And the topic for this year, the application, is all around tackling food insecurity in at least 3 out of our 10 neighborhoods that have the highest rates of gun violence. So again, how can we hopefully make a dent in gun violence by providing the community with some basic resources and needs. So that application is being judged right now by our Human Services Advisory Council. I'm very lucky. I get to just tell people, hey, here's money, go apply. And I don't have to make the have the heartache of actually deciding who gets the money or not. So we have some community experts who are working on that decision right now. In addition, next week we'll be announcing, so if you can sit on this news for just a few more days longer, the city's going to be announcing a grocery assistance program. We're going to be piloting this program, and the whole concept is how can we, and we're going to be piloting in Winton Hills, how can we help families get groceries to their front door using delivery, but then give them literal dollars in their pockets to spend on their groceries, and making sure those dollars can be used on, yes, things that are fresh fruits and veggies, but other basic essentials like diapers, like period products, like shampoo, cleaning products, those type of things. So I'm really, really excited. We'll be announcing the details of that program on Monday. So that was a lot right there. I'm going to take a big breath before I jump into the Act for Cincy, because that's a lot more to come. But any quick questions now or anything I can answer before I jump into the next piece? Okay. All right. So let's jump into Act for Cincy. And I've got a couple slides here. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Let's see if I can do it properly. Oh. Okay. Can people see a slide with an umbrella? Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So the umbrella graphic is the Achieving Change Together Act for Cincy blueprint. got a couple other graphics on here that I'll walk through, but essentially the 5 parts for Act for Cincy are thriving neighborhoods, reducing the accessibility of firearms to kids, improving well-being, improving youth support, and focusing on evidence-based policing. This framework came through those pivot community meetings. So it's been well over a year where we use those meetings to really discuss with community members, what are you seeing? What would help here? And these kind of areas bubbled to the top. So just know that this is, again, based in community conversation. The reason why there's a big yellow circle is because I am leading the action team focused on reducing the accessibility of guns to kids. So that's something I'm focused on. I'll dive a little bit into that as well. But to kind of walk you through these other pieces, we have a whole series of programs that exist today that support pieces of this. In addition, we have established some working groups that also align to these. So when we think about thriving neighborhoods, right, I think we all can understand what that looks like, right? Living in a neighborhood where it's safe to walk around and get the essentials. So a lot of that work comes through when we think about how the city is investing into economic development across the city, how we are supporting groups doing work, whether that's through our human services funding or other grants and funding opportunities that we're doing. It's also around efforts around beautification and dignification. In fact, we have 2 of those action teams, one in the West End, one in OTR, focused specifically on that piece to really make the neighborhood look and feel safer. And for my nerds in the room, you'll be familiar with CPTED, right? Which is the place-based kind of crime prevention through environmental design, is that acronym. And it's the idea of, like, if you can make the environment safer, whether that's through things, it could be fencing and lighting, right? Things like that. But it can also be, let's put in a garden into that abandoned lot right there, right? So that's crime prevention through environmental design can take different shapes and forms. I'm going to come back to the secure storage, accessibility of firearms. Around improved well-being, I mentioned very briefly our hospital-based violence intervention program. The branding for that, it's now called the Hope and Shield Network, and it is a partnership with UC Health and Cincinnati Children's. And we have hired what are called violence prevention professionals, VPPs. We have 3 of them, and they work within those hospital systems so that anyone who comes in with a gunshot injury, why am I blinking suddenly? Carol's going to correct me. It's between the ages of, I think, 0 and it's like under 40. I'm having a brain fart. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Okay, yeah, I think it's under 40 and under, who come in with a gunshot injury. Not only are they going to get stitched up, right, and get the medical, urgent medical care they need, but they'll have the option to pair with these VPPs who are going to help them look at what are your other needs. Do you need help with access to housing? Do you need help with food? Do you need help with substance abuse treatment? Do you need help with mental health treatment, right? So they'll really provide that wraparound care, and they'll be with the patient for 6 to 12 months after that shooting incident. So that's also an important piece of it, is the kind of longer term care beyond just the time at the hospital. So that Hope and Shield Network is up and running, really excited about it. I also mentioned kind of some of those other survivor programs we have, whether it's the Divert one for domestic violence or our Victims Assistance Liaison Unit. We will also have, actually one more thing on that. Our rec centers, our employees at the rec centers have also gone through trauma-informed care. And there is an action team that's aligned to trauma-informed care and another action team around mental health. So again, really digging into how do we expand that area. On youth support, I think we all can think of like a dozen organizations that does amazing work for kids in the community, right? And it's all about how do you create safe places for kids, but also safe adults for kids to be around. Hey, Cincinnati, so that's, what is that? Hopeful Empowered Youth. Did I get that acronym right? Someone correct me in the chat. They're doing a lot of work around this as well. Again, but how do we have those safe spaces? So obviously in the city of Cincinnati, we have our rec centers. So literally an award-winning program we did last summer is Rec at Night, where we had Two of our rec centers, Avondale and the West End, open into the late night on Saturdays, where I think it was 14 and above kids, teenagers could come and they could do activities like get your hair cut, get your nails done, listen to a silent disco, right? Participate in that. Again, trying to give kids safe places to be around safe adults. So doing work there. Also, I think about how much the city invests into programs that support that work. So we have amazing funding opportunities through boots on the ground funding, which really funds kind of grassroots level community efforts, as well as our Safe and Clean fund. Again, Safe and Clean is a little bit more aligned to that kind of environmental piece, but we have a lot of programs that get funding there where it ties youth employment and let's say gardening, right? So a lot of really great overlap and my least favorite word, synergy in that space. And then, I think too, when we talk about improved youth support, there's a lot of opportunity for us to continue to partner with CPS and their kind of after school programs. How do we make sports more accessible for folks, right? There's a lot of work there. The last piece, I talked a lot about policing, so I'm not going to keep talking about that since I rattled off a bunch already. But again, just wanted to emphasize when we talk about policing in the city, it is beyond just the cars on patrol. And shout out to Iris Rowley and many of the other leaders in the space who really have led the community policing problem solving approach. Sarah, right? How we think about policing here. So I'm going to dive into my reducing accessibility to guns for kids. And the reason we're talking about kids is because obviously state of Ohio, we can't prevent adults who meet the requirements, right, from having a gun. So really we got to focus in on the kids. And I think it was 2022, sadly, we saw a real big spike in kids involved in shootings, both as the shooters and as the victims. And so the city has really been doing a lot to really focus in on that. And secure firearm storage is really important for many reasons. One, if we think about unintentional shootings by kids, just a couple of weeks ago, we saw a 5-year-old who shot their 7-month-old sibling. The sibling lived, but that is just like an unimaginable tragedy. In my community of Madisonville, handful of years ago, we lost a 3-year-old when their 5-year-old sibling picked up a gun that had been left out in the house. So those unintentional shootings by kids, to me, are one of the most preventable tragedies that we can have. So secure firearm storage, helping with that, but also when we think about suicide prevention, 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides. And that stat holds true nationally as well as in the state of Ohio. And I personally don't feel like we talk about it enough when we talk about gun violence or the cost of gun violence and easy accessibility of guns. And there's been a trend across the state where sadly kids using firearms and suicides has gone up, right? The number of youth. And this really sad and scary part about that is guns are very, very lethal and they take a split moment, right? So kids are very impulsive and this is a very lethal means that is accessible to kids. So for me, when we think about, secure storage, there's also this suicide prevention space. So what I did with this action team is I split it into 3. The first one, as you can see here, is really focusing on public events and sports. And the goal there is to reduce the number of guns being stolen out of cars. And that is because we are seeing an awful trend of where over 60% of the guns being stolen are coming out of cars. And it's oftentimes kids, teenagers who are doing this. And this really peaked during TikTok. There was a TikTok trend around certain cars that were easy to break into. So we saw a bunch there. But even still, there are stats almost every weekend of, a handful of guns being stolen out of cars. And sometimes the car's not even locked. It's wild to me. So what I'm trying to do here is we are actually going to be hosting a summit with all the sports teams and entities here in June. And we'll be talking through secure storage because, you cannot take a loaded gun into a Bengals game. To me, that feels obvious, but we're still seeing people bring loaded guns, realizing they can't take it in and sliding it under their front seat. So how do we encourage folks either leave your gun at home or if you want to have it with you, it's got to be in a lockbox in the car, right? It's got to be locked up so it's not easily accessible. So that's kind of the first part there. and I've been meeting with the sports teams and we're brainstorming, how do we make like a public service announcement, PSA style campaign to really educate folks there. The second one here actually just had a call with over 20 healthcare partners across the region. And the goal is to really normalize the conversation between a healthcare provider and a patient about secure firearm storage. So Cincinnati Children's does a really great job of this, and they've been working on it for years, where they even have a virtual reality training that they can have their pediatricians go through, where they model these conversations, because it can be really awkward. I'm not a gun owner. I've chosen not to have a gun, so it can be awkward for me to have that conversation with a gun owner, right? It can be it's hard to make sure that that's a judgment-free zone, that this is really a safety conversation, not a political one, right? So how do we normalize these conversations across our regional healthcare network? So had that call this morning, ton of people joined. I think there's a lot of great steps. I know Cincinnati Health Department is already ready to take the next step on getting our healthcare professionals trained on how to have these conversations. The last part is just around caretaker outreach through the schools. So how can we leverage the CPS network, let's say, to get to parents and caretakers to really tell them why it's important to lock up their guns, again, at home and in vehicles, whether it's, again, in the context of kids unintentionally hurting themselves or others, or in the context of suicide prevention. So really I've been working on that piece as well. And so I want to share one more kind of program. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can hit the right button at any point. So last year, end of December, my office led the rollout of a new out-of-home gun storage program through CPD. So if you're a gun owner who needs to get the gun out of the house for any reason, it could be a family member is experiencing a mental health crisis, or maybe the grandkids are coming to visit, or maybe you're moving or going out of town and don't want your gun stolen, you can call 311 and they'll walk you through the process on how you can make an appointment to store your gun safely, securely, and for free with Cincinnati Police for up to 6 months. And again, this is a purely voluntary program because, as I mentioned, the state, we cannot legislate any of this. So it's really meant to be a public safety offering for folks. All right, it's 12:45. That was a lot. I will pause and take questions.
Okay, so Danny has his hand up. And then Tyrone.
Thanks, Doug, for calling on me, and thank you again, Anna, for that really, really informative and interesting presentation. You managed to present a lot, but also in a way that I think was digestible and gives us a really good sense of what the city is doing in terms of reducing gun violence. And really importantly, I think both in terms of law enforcement-based strategies, but also non-law enforcement-based strategies. And I think in this day and age, we are at a point in this country where thankfully, we're realizing that both of those types of violence reduction strategies are necessary. And Cincinnati, you mentioned this at a certain moment, but also in my own recent past, as a researcher, I was at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and with a research position around violence reduction strategies. And Cincinnati is truly one of the, kind of highest standards in terms of violence reduction strategies across policing and non-law enforcement strategies. So, it's really something for Cincinnati to be proud of, the legacy of the collaborative agreement from early 2000s, which Mark was also a part of as a community partner, but also this legacy of problem-oriented, problem-solving oriented policing, CJIC, but also again combining law enforcement-based strategies with community-based strategies. And so, when it comes to Act for Cincy, my big question is, in addition to all of the really, really wonderful initiatives that are part of that, I know, and Carol, also have some stuff to throw in here, so I won't try to say everything, but
Go ahead.
I think maybe 2 or 3 kind of big areas where I wonder if there is still opportunity to enhance or strengthen Act for Cincy. Just in talking out in the community, I think that there's a lot of folks doing violence prevention or violence intervention work who aren't even familiar with Act for Cincy as a framework. It's like this idea that it includes and encompasses, kind of community members, community organizations. So, how has the community engagement been, in terms of, making sure that local groups are kind of part of Act for Cincy, that their work is being leveraged and truly kind of incorporated into the Act for Cincy framework. So that's one big area. And also, again, all these areas, Mark is interested, we're open, we would love to collaborate with you on, seeing how we can also kind of activate our networks to support in all this. But the other big thing too is, and I know this was a critique from the beginning of the rollout, is, to what extent is CPS, Cincinnati Public Schools, involved in this as well? Knowing that a lot of the public schools also do have all sorts of programs that they are implementing to try to reduce violence within their schools and in their surrounding neighborhoods. Has CPS also been involved in conversations about implementing Act for Cincy? And then third is, and already Cincinnati does have the hospital-based violence intervention program, which is wonderful. It's absolutely a best practice. But also there's kind of community violence intervention programs outside of hospitals. So the same idea of kind of employing credible messengers, folks from these communities who can go out and actually engage with those people who are at the highest risk of either being victims or perpetrators of gun violence, and trying to offer services to those folks, really proactively. This again is something that is sort of cutting edge practices across the country. They've been a little bit controversial. And so I know Carol and I and everybody on the Violence Prevention Committee for Mark have really been wondering if, community violence intervention programs will also be able to be incorporated into this Act for Cincy framework as it moves forward. So that again was a lot, but again, thank you so much, and really appreciate your time with us today.
Yeah. So I'll start with what I remember. So community involvement for Act for Cincy. So I mentioned the pivot community meetings have gone away. We now have Act for Cincy meetings. They are every first Thursday of the month, 6 p.m. at the Pro Kids facility that's just right around the corner from City Hall. And that's where those action teams are reporting out. Gabriel Fletcher at the city is our violence reduction manager. So he's leading that up and leading up that vision. So I know way more about my secure storage action team than in the weeds on all the others, but that work is going, open invite, really trying to get as many people in the room as we can. I know many of you have also been to the sheriff's gun violence prevention meeting too, right? So there's lots of groups doing this work for sure. I think your question about CPS, that one's a tough one because we all see the need to work together. I think there are various reasons why it hasn't quite come together as way as I would love to see. I personally think there's a lot of potential in that after school space. If we think about what's happening at the rec centers, the Rec at Night program and how well that went, I'm very curious and interested in how can we, bring kind of those type of model activities to the schools. But the schools have a lot going on, and I think that's a big piece of it, right? The schools are a different entity than the city. They have their own deficit. They're doing this whole restructuring now where they're moving kids around. And I'll be honest, I think establishing the middle schools will be helpful. 7th graders and 12th graders are in a very different spot in their journey, in their development. So I actually think breaking that out will have a really good impact. So a lot of work to be done, I think, with the schools. I personally have had many conversations with our school board around how can we look at that mental health piece? Are there summer programs we can incorporate? But I'm going to be honest, there's only so much money. There's only so much money to go around, especially with the federal government cutting funding, with the state not funding this work. So that leads to kind of your second question about community intervention programs. So City of Cincinnati put out the RFP a couple years ago for proposals, and the proposal we selected is the Hope and Shield hospital-based violence intervention program. There are other kinds of programs out there. I've met with Shauna Murphy, the superintendent, to talk through the possibility of a school-based violence intervention program. Again, I've met with the city of Albuquerque that has one of those, and to do a pilot program for the first year in one school in Albuquerque cost $1 million for that model. So again, a lot of this work is where, there's just not enough dollars to do all the things I wish we could in the world. So where can we invest and track successes and knowing there's more space to grow? I really would love to see the county more engaged, to be honest. I think the county has a lot of resources, whether that's through JFS or other county level programs. I would love to see a lot more engagement at that level, to be honest. Okay, I see more hands, but I'll let you.
Right, Tyrone and then Doug.
Good afternoon, Anna. Okay, just two quick things. The first thing I would wish to commend you on the great work that you're doing.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And my question is, you've spoken of numerous resources. So is it possible for you to perhaps list some links where people can more easily avail themselves to the many resources that you've mentioned?
Yes, I can. You know what? I'm going to send a follow-up to Dan. Is that cool? And then we'll get all that information out. Because, you know, I even forgot to mention there are free gun locks in every library you can tell people about as well.
Excellent. That's it for me.
Okay, awesome.
I have two questions. Is it not possible to develop a program where we provide lock boxes to individuals? I mean, I think that many people who own guns are unwilling to spend that money. I don't think providing a lockbox would be open to constitutional challenges.
Correct.
No, I never understand some people's interpretation of our Bill of Rights. But, with that, I mean, I think, from a pragmatic point of view, in particular, when we take a look at weapons in cars, which is one of the major sources of people obtaining firearms. It's not just education that you should have a lockbox. So, our sheriff might benefit from that education. But, do you have them? And if it's in a lockbox that is very hard to break into, that decreases guns. And, so have the city and the region looked at funding lock boxes. And, would that be a pragmatic way of saying, it's not going to cure everything?
Yep. Yeah. So Cincinnati Police, Sheriff's Office, and now our libraries all give out free cable locks. So that is a way to get cable locks. We have other organizations like Whitney Strong, Moms Demand Action, and Be Smart. Also the VA do hand out a lot of gun locks.
Right.
The city last year, we did fund lock boxes to be given out through Cincinnati Children's. So that was part of, one of the things that they were incorporating was around that. But Doug, I'll be honest, again, comes back to resources, right? Those do have a cost to them. And we know there are a lot of gun owners. So right now we make cable locks very readily accessible. And then, Children's has been doing a good job on the lock boxes. And we know.
Locks boxes, because they're more expensive, but they're much more secure. My other question is that when we take a look at counseling and support, we in our communities have developed programs for the individual survivors. But, one of the things that I have experienced and learned is that violence impacts the whole
community.
family, neighbors, and friends. And we know that from going back to Greek tragedies. That is, that emotion and anger leads to revenge. And I don't know what programs we have, but one of the things at our last board meeting that we were discussing, and one thing that I've thought about over time, is what kind of support and emotional support do we directly give to those family members? That is, with our most recent incident. So after you've shown family members a very violent video that had to have an emotional impact that would incite anger and revenge, to support those individuals so that it doesn't spread out. That is, I think we see lots of shootings not just by the victim in the future, but by family members and others looking at revenge? And what kind of steps are we taking to deal with, that issue? Because I think, that is another large component.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I appreciate that. And I think survivor support is where we can continue to be better at it. Our victims assistance liaison unit is meant to do that. And last year in the budget, it was actually my top priority to get them funding for an additional full-time employee, because they still now only have 3 full-time employees along with some interns. So my vision is if we can keep growing that team, because it sits within the city, they're trained, certified social workers. But I will also say tomorrow and Thursday and Friday this week, my office has led the initiative to bring what is called the National Mass Violence Center to the city of Cincinnati to train our city employees on how do we respond to a mass violence incident. But specifically, what we've asked them to do is to customize the training to really focus in on community support after a shooting, specifically what I've been calling, tragically, everyday mass shootings. So if you think about the shooting of Dominic Davis in the West End, or last summer, I live in Madisonville on Bramble, there was a shooting, 5 people shot in Bramble Park in the middle of a celebration. How do we support? How do we address that? How do we help the community? I personally went door to door handing out flyers about you could get, talk to a therapist at the library from Talbert House. I don't even know if anyone showed up to that, but I tried. So this was something we'll be looking at as a city this week specifically, is how can we actually build up a response for that community resiliency in the aftermath of a shooting, because I do think it is a gap in our services.
Right. I have one comment, and then Carol and Ariel.
And Mary.
This is a regional problem.
Yeah.
You actually mentioned my neighborhood, which is, trying to remind people, and Mark, that we are a regional organization. You mentioned Norwood. But when you take a look at the movement of guns, with our most recent event, you take a look at, well, where was the car stolen? You look at all of that, it's a regional problem. But yet, different governments, they have their turf. They don't play nice. And being a regional problem, the city of Cincinnati, I think, will have a limited impact unless we learn how to play together to solve the problems. And, that's just my comment that, that we need people to address that.
And I will say quickly, people cross state borders, which means guns cross state borders. So that is why we need federal legislation at the end of the day. Right. So even state by state is tough. And you look at a city like Chicago, which everyone always points to, look at their gun laws, look at their gun laws. Well, Indiana's an hour from the border and they have bad gun laws, right? Wisconsin's 2 hours from the border and they have bad gun laws, right? So I agree, always space to collaborate. Again, I would love to see the county at these tables more often as well as we think about a regional approach.
Right. Carol?
Thank you. This has really been good coverage of the big, broad picture that's undergoing and ongoing, and you've presented it's really phenomenally well with all of the level of details. Truly,
I really appreciate that, because Carol is in a lot of these meetings, so thank you, Carol.
Yeah, no, I mean this is one of the much clearer presentation of it I've seen that so far, honestly. And I think and I want to get you off of gun locks and onto some other areas. Because I mean, your insights and your ability to make the argument for them are so powerful. And I'm not saying they're not important, but I'm also saying they're low-hanging fruit, but they're not going to serve most of the situations that we have in Cincinnati as the major sources. I guess the 2 things that I'm thinking of right now, 4 things I'm thinking of, but one of the things you talked about was the lack of funding available for more concerted, like you said we have 3 people in the victim assistance program. We have 2.5 people really in the violence prevention professionals at the hospitals.
Yeah.
And we really need, and I mean, if you look at the community violence intervention strategies, we need people out in the communities providing exactly what you were describing, that everyday mass shooting response, because it's not always a mass shooting, but it's in many neighborhoods, it's all too close to every day. And even if it's not every day, the repercussions of so many recent shootings in some neighborhoods is just that kind of community violence street outreach response, where people are preachers and, you know, coaches and humans that care and have been there, can speak that kind of support. Have we talked about the cost of a single shooting in Cincinnati? Do we have a number for that?
I know you do.
I have numbers for Columbus. I have numbers for Detroit. I have numbers for Lexington or Louisville. I do not have numbers for Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I mean, the numbers for Columbus are published through the Cost of Violence website, and we've got an Office of Data and Performance Analytics, and I bet you they can put those numbers together. So that shouldn't be a high ask to get that number.
Oh, I wish that was true, Carol. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying logistically it shouldn't be hard. Politically, it might be a bit of a stretch.
No, it's not the political problem.
Really?
You know, I mean, you know, tracking data, there's a lot of data, a lot of improvements we can do on the back end. You know, I think what has also been raised to my attention is it depends on what kind of shooting, right? And what happens afterwards, and that can range. For those on the call, I feel like nationally, kind of a quick number that people will throw out is like $1 million per shooting.
Per homicide.
Right. So that's typically the number.
And we have about 60 per year in Cincinnati. So there's the cost savings of not having those.
Yeah. I know.
So just the retaliation prevention aspects of community violence intervention, I think, is underestimated.
Well, and I think too, you know, we have community partners that we fund. We give a lot of money to groups like Urban League. We give money to, you know, Mitch Morris gets a grant almost every year, right? I think
those grants are not paying for salaries for anybody. They're paying for services that are provided usually directly for the youth. There's very, very, very little money that goes into the number. I mean, I'd love to see an accounting of how many people we actually have doing anything close to full-time work in this area, because I'm afraid it's less than 10.
Yeah, that I don't know. I mean, what I can say is, right, when we talk about this, so the city budget this year, we're about to go into our fiscal 2026 budget. We have to have it passed by the end of June. We have a $10 million deficit at the city that we're trying to close across the board, right? So we've locked in our human services funding at 1.5%. Gun violence prevention is one of those spaces that we're funding. We have our boots on the ground. We have our safe and clean grants. So that, you know, the city does do a lot, but we cannot be the only funder.
Well,
right?
I think your leverage potential is huge. You know, if we can get the right, you know, and I'm working on that. I'm
not going to get myself in trouble here by throwing specific groups or people under the bus. But I think, you know, a lot of people come to the city of Cincinnati specifically for funding, and we do a lot, but we can't cover it all, which makes it tough, which is why, again, I look at, you know, it'd be great if we had a supportive state government, right? Like the state could help a ton if they were supportive. They're not. The Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the White House would have loved to tap them some more, but they're gone, right? So, you know, I think, you know, again, I'm going to keep saying, I think the county has, you know, has programs, and they have funding for some of those programs where, again, I would love to see them in the room a little bit more often as well. And that's all I'm going to say before I get myself in trouble.
Okay. Ariel, do you still have a question?
Yes. You talked about the Safe at Night program that worked well. Did you say Avondale and West End?
And Rec at Night, yes, Rec at Night.
And we have congregations and judicatories. So I'm wondering if there are neighborhoods where you would like to replicate this, where if we pull together, we could, you know, with volunteers and maybe youth staff, open a center or maintain a center this summer. I'm not saying I can make this happen, but can we think that way since we're a group of congregations?
Yes, and I'm going to put my city email in the chat. And if you want to send me an email, that would be great. I would love to talk about that because I do Anna.Albi, it's Cincinnati-OH.gov. I would love to expand that program. I think the Rec at Night program, because actually, you know, we started the call talking about shootings going up in the summertime, and actually for kids, for youth involved violence, it actually went down last summer, and we saw peaks during the school year. A stat I didn't read off earlier, youth shooting victims decreased by 34% in 2024 to the previous year. So we actually have seen some good movement here. It's never enough, right? One shooting is too many, but we're working on it. So yes, please, Ariel, reach out to me, send me an email. Would love to talk through how we can expand, you know, that type of programming out.
Right, I especially want to invite people who have not made a comment or had a question. Hearing all voices.
Mary's had her hand up.
Yeah, I'm gonna get there. Thank you.
Well,
I just wanted to encourage people, and I was going to say that Mary's next. Yeah.
first of all, I just want to say I enjoyed your presentation, and I was telling a few people before we got online, but I went through Madisonville the other day, and I was so surprised at all the stores you got now, and it's just amazing how Madisonville is cleaned up. And I only seen one group of people, which you say was young males, and they was in front of the store. But I was so amazed at what you have done in Madisonville. And when I was involved with the 52 community councils, we had gun violence. We didn't have much gun violence, but we had violence.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm trying to say, I was surprised that you were saying that it's shortage of food is what's causing these kids to act up.
I'm not going to say that was the only cause, but I don't think it was a
Right.
helpful contributing factor.
Right. And my concern is that we have many organizations out there helping, some from church organizations and some just for people that want to help.
Yep.
And that's where I would like to see a lot of the money go to those organizations because they are making a difference. I've seen it done in Cleveland and Columbus and all, but sometimes they're not getting the money. It's other organizations are getting it, and it's not effective as the ones that's out there in the street working one-on-one with these youth. The suicide thing, what I'm concerned about is what is the statistics of why people are, why we are finding out these children especially are committing suicide.
Yeah.
Is it lack of food, lack of whatever? What is the real reason behind those?
I don't have the official academic response to that, but I can tell you in all the community conversations that I've been a part of, social media does not help, right? The pressures kids are feeling, the way kids are getting bullied today, the way they can feel so isolated. Social media is not helping any of those problems. And you layer on generational trauma, right? Other, issues. It's hard to be a kid today. It really is. So I don't have the one answer on that. That's more of me, Anna Albi, answering that question, but I'm sure there's plenty of researchers who can give you more specific information. But I think the easy accessibility of guns, right? There are just more guns today than there were, right? And so that just makes it challenging because I think the Cincinnati Children's, when they presented us to last year, they came to council and they said over the past 10 years, past decade, they've seen firearm suicides amongst kids more than double over that period. So it just keeps going up because guns are easy to get a hold of now and they're instant and kids are impulsive, right? So that's again why we talk about you just don't leave a gun out in the house, especially if someone's struggling. It just makes things worse.
And I do agree with the person that said something, how is we as an organization, because we are, composed of churches, how could we help? Because it's going to be, if we don't get involved in it, it's going to be a hot summer, and we don't want that. So
yeah. I mean, I think all those outreach programs are amazing, and I've always say that there are people in the community everywhere, every neighborhood I go in, there's someone in the community doing the work. And it's actually really lovely about Cincinnati, right? We just have so many helpers. You know, so keep doing that work. If there, I can send out the information around city funding opportunities. Many of them have passed because we do grants earlier in the year, so we can make our budget for June. But happy to send that information as well. There are other kind of groups out there, like United Way sometimes has some funding opportunities, other foundations. So, but yeah, please keep doing the work and join in on the Act for Cincy teams, right? Like if you have a presence in West End and OTR, like want to loop you in on the work they're doing around beautification and dignification. If you have an expertise when it comes to like trauma-informed care and mental health, like let's get you in the room for those conversations as well.
Okay, thank you.
Right, very good questions, Mary. And I do know some of the data on suicides. It's something that I have followed and studied. The number of youth, and in particular adolescents, who look at suicide and consider it has not changed greatly over time. Social media definitely does not help it. But what has changed is access to guns have two components. One, if you have access, you can act very quickly and act on your intention before you think about it. And two, it is the most deadly and effective means of trying to commit suicide.
Yep.
So one of the things that we've really seen is the number of successful suicides going way up. You know, it is a very difficult issue, but you know, that's what studies both nationally and regionally, you know, have seen. I will give Danny the last question.
Well, I was not going to ask a question so much as just identify a few action steps that I think have emerged from this, just to make sure we have on our radar. And so with that said, if we have another few minutes, I know Bob just put a hand up, so I would let Bob ask a question, then I'll just summarize a couple follow-up steps after that.
Okay, Bob.
Oh, you're on mute, Bob.
You're on mute, Bob.
Which Bob you talking about? Me?
Go ahead.
Oh, Bobby, there he is.
I have a separate matter, but it's just a real quick question. Is there a Mark ID drive scheduled in the next 3 or 4 months?
Yes, there are a few of them. And I can get you those exact dates after the meeting here. I want to say a couple, well, at least one still in May, and then I think one in June as well.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah. Yep.
And I got a comment in the chat I want to address really quickly, which is around kind of like after school when kids are waiting for buses and that type of thing. You know, again, I'm interested in looking into how do we get kids to a safe third place after school, right? I don't think it is ideal for kids to be going and hanging out at the bus stops, right? I'd rather them be at a rec center, at Mitch Morris's place or whatever. So, you know, I continue to do brainstorming around that. But, you know, even if we can keep, you know, how do we get more kids even enrolled into the programs that the school offers after school, right? If that's through activities beyond the classroom or sports. So make that quick comment, just because I saw it in the chat as well.
Yeah, you know, Grace Church and Redeemer have drop-in programs for kids from Clark and from Aiken.
Yeah.
Where they come in after school and have a snack and do an activity.
Yeah, and there's so many of those, and it's awesome, right? Even the library does it, right? And it's funny, the library has told me too, they're like, the kids are always better behaved after you feed them too, right? So, you know, being able to feed the kids. Yeah, me too, I always say that too. I was like, I'm better when you feed me too, you know? So I think, you know, there's so many pockets of good things happening in the community. So I don't want anything that I mentioned from the city to take away from any of these, you know, individual efforts, because they're all important, they're all needed. And I'm just very grateful for all of your help across the community. So thank you. All right, Danny, over to you.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, we're already getting to these things that I did just want to really highlight and, you know, make sure that we all take with us moving forward. thinking about the ways that Mark as an organization can really contribute to the kinds of social change we want to see on this issue of community violence. I mean, one of the big ones, what Mark is really historically focused on is doing this advocacy work with policymakers, and so lifting up our concerns to folks like Councilmember Albi. I mean, this is really, really helpful, I think, to hear from you, get the most updated information, also for us to express our concerns. And so I think we do have some folks who are really, really investing in this topic in Mark. And so, I would love for us to continue talking about these issues around funding. I think that there really hopefully can be other partners, whether it's county or some sort of level of government or private funders who, hopefully we could work on leveraging what the city's investing in these issues with other funding partners, and I think that hopefully Mark can support those kinds of conversations. And so that at the policy level, and also, I'd love to continue looking at, again, this cost of a homicide in Cincinnati. I think that, again, if we, as Mark and our connections with other researchers, if we can support the city in putting that together in a way that would leverage that statistic to try to advocate for more funding for these issues, I think that could be really helpful. But then the whole other aspect of it that we're all already talking about, and I really want us as Mark to think about this more, and how we, as churches across the Cincinnati area, across the metro area, how we can leverage our spaces at churches, make those safe spaces for youth. And as Ariel, you were mentioning, I mean, we already have churches in our network who are doing that. So what does that look like to turn your space, your church space that often is probably not being totally used in those after school or evening moments? Are there kind of steps that we can take to help churches, make those kind of safe spaces for youth? So, so much change needs to happen at the policy level, but also so much change needs to happen at the community level. And so we, as members of churches that are part of the Mark organization, we can, I think, work on both of those aspects, and we can work in conjunction with the city to enhance and strengthen those sorts of efforts. So again, thank you so much, Anna. This has been really, really helpful. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.
Right, Anna, I want to thank you for two things. One is a great presentation that really has given us lots of information that we can learn and better discern, and was very thoughtful. The other is to thank you for the work that you have done over your life in this area. It's very inspiring, and so I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And so again, thank you. I always, at the end of our delegates meeting, remind people that before the next delegate meeting, it would be very, I ask you to discern what you can do, what actions you can take. So, we do lots of advocacy work, but we do it through others. But I really believe that money and government isn't going to fix all of our problems. It is individuals acting within their community and encouraging others to act within their community that also bring change. And so I ask you to consider that. I really appreciate you attending today and all the thoughtful comments and questions. A reminder that on June 11th, we will have our next delegates meeting. So do mark that on your calendar. It will, as always, be at noon. And that's the Wednesday in June. With that, we are adjourned. So thank you for coming today.
Thanks, everyone.